Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and we are back with the Science of Fallout, continuing talking about FEV and all the super mutants and the different varieties. So, excuse the hair, it's a very hot and humid day here in Bonnie, Scotland, so I am not having a good time, but here we are. So, today we're going to talk about the Vault 87 mutants. So this is us going to the east coast, where the super mutants also became a problem, but they are quite different from the ones that we've been talking about so far from the original Fallout game on the west coast with the Mariposa super mutants. So Vault 87 was completed in 2071, and the original social experiment that they had planned was basically dropped, and instead Dr. Wayne Merrick was put in charge of research on FEV, and this was named the Evolutionary Experimentation Programme, or EEP. You can find some details in the Overseer's terminal that confirms that the vault was planned around Dr. Merrick and his work. There was research that was transferred over from Mariposa, West Tech and Vault-Tech, all names we should know by now because we have been talking about them, and they're all kind of connected. This content was cut out from the game. You can't get into the Overseer's office in Vault 87 to look at the terminal, but it was obviously something that was written during development as part of the background of where this experiment came from. So when the bombs fell and the vault was sealed, the dwellers inside became unwitting test subjects for FEV. So the EEP strain, and we can find some details on this from the Chief Physician's terminal, which is Dr. Merrick's terminal. So the strain that was used in Vault 87 is actually quite different from the one that was used at Mariposa, even before the Master started altering it to create the FEV2 strain. The EEP strain still had that recursive growth pattern, but the side effects of the virus were different. So, like the other forms of FEV, we did see increase in muscle mass, bone density and bone structure, but this strain also caused atrophy of both primary and secondary sexual characteristics, which means that atrophy means that they waste away or they disappear. This even included body hair, which is part of the kind of secondary sexual characteristics, so men having facial hair and things like that. And essentially, as Dr. Merrick described it, left them as blank slates. So they were asexual, there was no anatomy, there was no reproduction. And we know that isn't the case for the Mariposa mutants, who retained their anatomy and only became sterile because the FEV was falsely correcting the genome of the egg cells in females, and that's why they couldn't reproduce. The skin changes were similar as well, so there was thickening and toughening of the skin, and it acquired a kind of greenish yellow colour, unlike the kind of grey-green that we saw with the Mariposa mutants, but they also required the usual resistance to radiation and other dangers in the Fallout Wasteland. So the biggest difference is that almost all of them showed significant intellectual decline. So damaged neural patterns led to kind of brain damage and resulted in extreme aggression and more primitive behaviours. And one of the earlier female subjects actually lost so much brain function that she wouldn't sustain her basic needs, so eating, drinking, sleeping. And the subjects became so angry and so distressed that they became dangerous, so the researchers had to terminate them. And you can see just how many people this was. On the terminal, there's a whole list of the deceased of the vault, so everybody that died in the vault while it was still functioning. And I'll not go into too much detail. I have talked a lot about Vault 87 on the video in the Vault-Tech series, but anyone that's on that list that has the code UD000, which is unexplained undefined death, were EEP subjects, and that was 87 people in total. Whether that was on purpose or not, I don't know. But, you know, so 87 people that we know of that actually were subjected to this experimentation. And one of the problems is that, unlike with the Mariposa mutants, when infected with this strain of FEV, the mutations and the growth didn't stop or level out. It continued. So because the virus, it was basically, the virus was incomplete. So the version of it that it wasn't fully developed, so continued growth was a big side effect. And I think the Fallout 3 official game guide sums it up quite well. that they get bigger, stronger and dumber with age, and what that means is essentially they become the behemoths. So we see them progressing from super mutants through brutes to masters to overlords, and then the super mutant behemoths, which are the oldest, the strongest and the least intelligent, and that is a bit of a problem, as we'll see just shortly. So what happened in Vault 87, you reach this vault when the main story is one of the places that you do have to go to complete the story of Fallout 3, and it's a mess. There's gore bags everywhere, there's doors ripped off, everything's rusty, and there's mutants everywhere, and kidnapped wastelanders. Housekeeping's clearly not their strong point. So what happened? It's not very well accounted for, but we can assume that some of these specimens managed to break free and overpower the security and took control of the vault, so any remaining humans in the vault were either killed, driven out or converted, potentially, most likely, I would say the latter. And then the mutants found their way outside the vault and decided they needed to grow their numbers by kidnapping humans from the wasteland and sending them for a spa day and the green stuff. They didn't know how it worked, they just knew that that's how super mutants were born. You put a human in the green stuff, you get a super mutant, until it ran out. So unlike the Master's army, where the more intelligent mutants were considered important to the cause and were ranked above the ones that had lower intellect, these mutants don't value intellect or understand it, and their sort of evolution or transformation is apparently incredibly painful. Which isn't a surprise given what it does to sort of muscle mass and bone density and things like that. It would be potentially very, very uncomfortable, and it seems to drive most of them mad, which is what causes them to lose their kind of long-term memories from before the transformation. It's a good thing that doesn't happen in Pokemon evolution. That'd be pretty brutal for a children's game. But the tiny few who do retain their intellect and can resist these violent, aggressive urges are ostracised and misunderstood. They're treated as outcasts by these mutants. So obviously Fox is a big example. He was not driven mad by the pain of the transformation, and they didn't understand him, so they just kept him locked up, and he basically sat in this one tiny room and used his terminal to read and educate himself, because he didn't really have anything else to do with his time. And that's the problem. So the reason that, the Master and the Unity and his army was more successful is because they had a unifying voice that was capable of understanding, of analysing and trying to solve the problems. The Vault 87 mutants don't have that because they've rejected Fox, who could have potentially been able to help them and understand things, and they just don't really have anyone that understands exactly what's going on and what it is they're missing, because the biggest problem for them is that the green stuff, the FEV juice, is run out, and they know they need it to make more super mutants, but they don't actually know what it is or where they could find it. But that's not to say they're not trying, and it's very significant. Some of the locations where you do find that are being held by super mutants do have sort of significance to this. So they're looking for vaults, and they're also looking at medical facilities. So you find them in Our Lady of Hope Hospital, you find them in the Vault Tech HQ, and you find them in the Museum of Technology, which does have a Vault Tech exhibit in it. So they're looking for places that it makes sense to them that vaults would have FEV. Unfortunately for them, they're probably never going to find it, because only Vault 87 in this area actually had FEV, and all the other vaults had different things going on. So they're probably not actually ever going to be successful. And these mutants, they're loosely organised, and it's based on a kind of hierarchy of age and strength. There's no central leadership, there's no one voice saying this is what we should do and this is what we need to do. And they are fighting for their territory across the wasteland. They're under siege from the Brotherhood, the Outcasts, and even Talon Company in places. You can find their camps as well, dotted about, where they've got prisoners tied up, which obviously you're going to rescue because you're a good person. But, and that's the thing, is that because they're so aggressive to anything that's not a mutant, people are fighting back against them and trying to clear them out of places because of the danger that they pose. instead of, you know, if they were maybe going to approach a human settlement in a more peaceful way and say, look, we need help to find this stuff, then maybe that would be an option, but they just don't do that, and they don't have the knowledge to do that. So just like the Unity, this population of super mutants is doomed, and they're eventually going to become extinct. They're not going to find any more FEV juice, they're not going to figure out how to create it, and then of course Lone Wanderer comes along and wipes out Vault 87, and then probably tells the Brotherhood of Steel where they're coming from, so that they can manage the population. Which we know that the future elder of this chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel is very, very keen on. So, you know, we could fill in the blanks that he probably did go in and wipe out Vault 87 and destroy it at some point between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Don't know if that's true, but it sounds like something that Maxon would do. But from the mutants' point of view, it's quite a tragic story, that, you know, they are trying to fix this problem that they have, but they just don't have the resources they need to do that, and, you know, it's kind of a shame. And for us, it does prove that messing about with things like evolution, genome editing, and this kind of mad science is probably a bad idea. I say real evolution happens over thousands of generations, over massively long periods of time. Fast tracking it like this is potentially going to be more problematic, and it does seem like the people behind this haven't really taken that into consideration. And the Vault 87 mutants, they are distinct from the Mariposa FEV2 mutants. I would call them a subspecies from a scientific point of view, so same goes for the ones from the Institute, which we'll be talking about next week. And this is the thing, is that the mutants, they know that there's a problem that they need to solve in order to survive and to reproduce. If you're sneaky enough to get into Vault 87 and not be noticed by the mutants, you can overhear them talking about their search for the green stuff. They're trying their best to solve it, but they just don't have what they need. And the only other definite source of FEV we know about in this part of America is the Institute, and they don't like to share anything, as we know. And there's only two non-hostile super mutants in the Capital Wasteland. Fox, who you will run into in the course of the main plot. He's friendly. He's willing to be your companion if you're a good egg later on, but he's also really appreciative if you let him out of his room, and he'll help you acquire the Gek and things. And he doesn't really remember much of his life before he came to the vault. He does think he was taken from outside and brought to Vault 87, but he has not retained much memory of that, so he doesn't really know. And that's the thing, is that these mutants, they do lose themselves really after the transformation, because they don't have any memory from before, and the pain and adrenaline and all the kind of changes in the body happening, you know, they just completely lose their identity, which isn't quite the case for the West Coast mutants, you know. The other one that you might never see, actually, is it's a random encounter, and it's quite a rare one, and that's Uncle Leo. He's an absolute sweetheart, and even if you tell him you're robbing him, he'll just say, no, I want you to have it as a gift. And he talks about all sorts of things, and he's just a nice guy, and he's really grateful that you don't just shoot at him when you see him, which is, you know, bless his wee heart. You can encounter him up to 3 times, and there is different dialogue for each of those 3 encounters, but it is quite a rare one, so, you know, especially if you tend to fast travel all over the place instead of walking to places in the game, you might not come across him, but he is out there, and he's a sweetheart, so be nice to him if you do meet him, and he'll give you presents of clothing, and have a wee chat with you, which I think is adorable. But these two are the exceptions. They've been rejected, they're outliers because they've resisted these violent urges, and they've remained peaceful. And they've retained at least some sense of self and some kind of identity for themselves. But the super mutants are one of the most ubiquitous and the most dangerous threats in the Capital Wasteland, especially if you have broken steel and the Overlord starts showing up, because you can just put so many bullets into them and they still don't die. You know, they're a bit of a nightmare. But you know, it would be a good idea to let the super mutants die out and try and destroy them as much as possible because of the danger that they pose to your everyday wastelanders. But until that happens, they're going to do a lot of damage. You know, they kidnap people, they eat people, and you know, there's an ongoing battle with them, between them and the Brotherhood, and the Outcasts are dealing with them. Riley's Rangers are dealing with them. Talon Company are fighting them in various places. It's yeah, really, really interesting, but big difference between the mutants, and I think that's the thing, is that they are not the same. Their origin isn't the same. You know, they're similar enough that you can class them as the same thing, that they are super mutants because they're big and they're kind of greenish and they're really strong, but because the viruses that created them are so different, they're not the same species of mutant. They're definitely subspecies of super mutants, because there's such a difference in the viruses and the effect that it has on them. You know, and that I think is very interesting because there was, at least initially, there was some contact between Vault 87 and Mariposa military base, where Dr. Merrick talks about how he was getting pressure from them and from the government and from Vault-Tec to get some results, essentially. And then I'm guessing the lines of communication got dropped, and then obviously everything went to hell in the Vault, and then we don't really know. You know, obviously there wasn't really anybody left at Mariposa until the Master came along. So obviously something went wrong there at some point as well. But it's an interesting connection, and I do think that it is important to remember that they are different, and you know, the way they act is different, the way they look is different, but that's kind of on purpose. You know, that they have different origins. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think Vault 87 it's just an absolute mess when you get in there, and there's obviously some pretty horrible things have happened there even before the super mutants took over. You know, I've talked about a couple of things, like there was Peter Stevens, who was a man, he was a technician or a mechanic or something, and he lost his wife and child and was really, really depressed. But there's cut content that says that he never had a wife and child, but he was the reason that Little Lamplight started, essentially, and the kids there stopped trusting grown-ups. It's, you know, a lot happened there at various points in time, and if you're interested in reading more, I do have if you're interested in hearing more, I do have a video all about Vault 87 that digs into the terminal entries and things in more detail, whereas here we're just focusing on the kind of science of the thing and the mutants and how they compare to the ones that we've already talked about. But I do have a video on Vault 87 if you want to get into more on that, because I do think it's very interesting. So that's me signing off, so I can go and put the fans on because it is very warm here and I am not built for the heat. I was born in December, I'm Scottish, I prefer cold and I don't like summer, hence the fact that my hair has gone absolutely insane even though I literally just washed it 2 hours ago. But anyway, hope you're having a good summer wherever you are, and as always I love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.